The Epic of Gilgamesh, Epics and Forces, by Kyle Lurch. First, we'll begin with economics. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the amount of money that a person has is what causes their success or lack thereof in life. For instance, because Gilgamesh is quite wealthy, he is able to do what he wants without much restriction, a very pleasurable luxury. Modern times provide a similar situation, where people with money are often considered successful, usually have the ability to do more of what they want. However, as a whole, economics were a rather minor focus of the epic. Now let's talk about politics. Gilgamesh is generally free in his actions as a king, and he's not really held responsible for performing certain routine duties. This fact provides a reasonable amount of basic freedom for both Gilgamesh and the people in their daily lives. Also, the epic makes a larger commentary on how the king of any civilization really has no power over what happens, responsibility left to the gods. It leaves any authority ultimately weak, but it also prevents them from having to take blame. Now moving on to the intellectual aspect. The peoples described in the epic are quite religious, and they both believe in and rely on prayer to the gods to ensure their well-being. They believe that the gods ultimately had control over everything, as if the world is controlled in their hands, and is theirs to change as they wish. Let's look at culture. In the epic, Gilgamesh, in a way, creates his own culture. He shapes the foundation of his kingdom, and he is able to control what they believe in and how they act, resulting in a huge effect on, for instance, their literature, which in this case is about him. Also, they are proud of their architecture as a sign of wealth and power. Gilgamesh creates an impressive cedar city gate solely for the purpose of being showy, just as we in modern times create monuments and fancy houses. Social interactions are a vital part of this story. First of all, there is a lot of discussion of gender roles. Throughout the entire story, men such as Gilgamesh and Enkidu have the power and perform the actions, while women's primary purpose seems to be for the men and to mate with them. There are also points made on the health of these peoples, while Gilgamesh seeks immortality and fears early death. This represents that these people felt scared by disease and realized that they didn't have much control of it, unlike how we do today. Moving on to the forces of history, we'll begin with stasis versus change. Gilgamesh is constantly striving for change, beginning with his daily life, and later while striving for immortality. He makes a strong effort to break the trend of death and change his future. However, in the end, he is unable to achieve his goal and cannot obtain immortality and must eventually face death. Next is cooperation versus competition. Gilgamesh throughout the story is constantly trying to struggle or compete with the gods. From denying the will of a goddess to fighting Humbaba and cutting down the giant cedar tree, he always seems to deny their will. Unfortunately for him, the gods had the ultimate power in this situation, and were able to defeat him in any of these competitions, and had the final word. Now we'll look at nature versus technology. In this story, despite technology's constant attempts at dominance, nature holds the position of power. It has more power than technology, and it is ultimately more vital to the survival of the entire world population. Also, nature is controlled by the gods, who can create disasters with it and destroy all technology in order to preserve their will. Lastly, let's explore control versus resistance. Resistance is the more present force in this story, for Gilgamesh is constantly resisting, despite the fact that he is technically the authority. He constantly resists the natural order of his life. However, as seems to be a trend, Gilgamesh still ends up on the short end in comparison to the gods, who are able to stomp on and control his resistances to their order. These are the sources that were used for the images in this presentation.